Welcome back, MTG Joe here. We're going to be doing kind of a metagame breakdown, but not quite. So the arena clients are all sorts of messed up right now. You can't properly sideboard, like connectivity issues. Even like from a tracking, if you make a change to a deck, it treats it as a new deck sometimes, even in this deck tracker. So the stats are a little off right now, but what I wanted to do was just give some folks some ideas of deck lists people are trying out thus far. I'm going to do this one as a standard best of one video. I will do a separate standard best of three video, post both of them. So you can see the one thing I want to preface, it is very early in the season. People are still trying stuff out. I just checked the MTGO leagues. There's nothing in terms of new cards and from the decks yet. If you are on limited resources in terms of wild cards, do not necessarily craft the first thing you see. Usually, if you can be patient, wait a week or so, you get a little bit more normalized data, a week to 2 weeks, does help in that case. There are some decks that were existing decks that just get a couple upgrades, so you're probably safe there. But I will preface, always kind of be mindful, like, I solve the meta day one, usually not the case. It's sometimes clickbait, but keep that in mind. So prefacing this, these are things people are trying out. So we're going to leverage on TapGG. We have the latest Mythic players, people who have just kind of moved into Mythic. I'm going to send out a note to them to ask them to see if we can get the actual ranked. So you see here how it's like a percentage. See if we can get like the top whatever that use the tracker to see what the top players are playing. So that's something I'm going to ask them in the thing. Fortunately, just like how it is the client right now, I can't get stats. It usually takes a couple days for it to accumulate. So we don't have a Rakdos Lizards list, despite it having one of the higher win rates, but things are pretty flat, all things considered, as people try stuff out. Another kind of preface, the mono black is the most played deck right now. The mono black lists that I'm seeing right now are a bit unrefined, I would say. Just the curves seem a little odd for best of one, just like a lot of 4-drops in a format where you can be dead on turn 4. Not playing like a full set of cut downs or go for the throats seems a little odd as well, just based on the configuration. So I'm not going to feature those today. So we're going to jump into it. I'll paste all these deck lists as well as timestamps so you can go from there. So I'm actually on this list here. I finally got around to playing some constructed. Where am I? I'm right here. So even with that, it's saying I'm NA. And then even with the tracker. So I played, it's basically treating my games each time as a different deck. So even though these were all the same decks. So from the tracker, I'm 6-1. I played another 2-3 games, won those on my iPad. But we'll go kind of to the latest version. I'm going to feature this version of Mono Red and then another one from another player that's a little bit different. So with this version here, again, like it's treating the decks weird from the arena side. So this version here, I have a video up on my YouTube. There's a best of 3 version that I pasted as well. So ignore the sideboard for now. You are importing it. Be mindful. There looks to be another bug with, if you have the Cons of Turkey or the Better Art Monastery Swiss Sphere, it doesn't treat the deck as standard legal for whatever reason. So keep that in mind as you're importing. But this version of Mono Red, the way I built it was we had the new card Ember Heart Challenger. This isn't even, let me pulling it up for a sec. So the Challenger is a new 2-drop, 2-mana, 2/2 prowess. Whenever it gets targeted, so Valiant, so kind of like Heroic, but for the first time, you get to exile the top card of your library. You can play it on the turn, so it's some card advantage. We also have Heartfire Hero added in, so it's a mouse that gets bigger when you target it once per turn, and then when it dies, deals damage equal to each opponent, so kind of like a Cacophony Scamp, but the damage stacks on it. Might of the Meek as a way to give a creature trample. If it's a mouse, it gets +1 power, and then it allows us to cycle through. The one thing I will say, do play 2 Mirror and Battle Bane Splitters. I was trying Squee, but this just helps. The equipped counts as Valiant, so you can just re-equip it, even if it's equipped, and you get that effect there. This is another nice flash kind of bonus damage. But the rest of the deck, we got like Swift Spears, Monstrous Rage, Shocks is just replacing Play with Fires, your Slick Shots, Lightning Strikes. I'm playing 2 cases just for some card advantage, some Frenzies, and then a 20-2 ratio of Mountains to Mishra's Foundries. Some folks have asked about cards like the Red Mouse Land. Now, notably, that Mouse Land does not allow you to add colored mana to your mana pool for non-creature spells. It can only be used for creatures, which makes it a lot harder to cast your non-creature spells. Additionally, we only have 8 mice, 4 of which the Ember Heart Challengers already have haste, so it kind of defeats the purpose there. You could play something like the Demonic Ruckus, but I don't like it as much because it's effectively sorcery speed. It's telegraphed, where like your Bane Splitters, your Might of the Meeks, your Monstrous Rage are all instant speed, so it makes combat a little bit more tricky in terms of your opponent understanding how much damage you have out. But if you want to see the deck in action, it's up on my YouTube. Another mono red deck. This version is from Test's profile. They went 19-6. So this version here, really no new cards. They're playing Forge's main, which I don't hate, but I do think there's a few too many 3-drops in this configuration. They do have a little bit more 1-mana removal with Torch the Tower in the main. So in the grindier matchups, this is probably better than my version against things like Golgari or Control. But in the mono red mirrors might be a little bit slower. I just think you have a glut of 3-drops here. You may, after playing the games, might need a 23rd land, I would maybe consider. You could also play some utility lands, but this is just like another configuration. If you don't have some of the new cards yet, this is something you can try out, because a lot of these cards have been staples of the mono red archetype leading up to now as you build out your collection. Ugly Tater time. So pretty sure one of my losses was to Ugly Tater, or a deck very similar to this, in terms of black, white, kind of mid-rangey, life gain, bat tribal. So case of a Uneaten Feast gains you life. You have, okay, so this one will at least let me show the cards for now. Being a little, so like the hover should work, but we're getting a little bit particular. So whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you gain a life, and then you could kind of get the reanimate effect. Rune Lurker Bat, you have Amalia and Elias Sakor that cares about life gain. Deep Cavern Bat is another way, helping hand to return your cheap stuff. Essence Chandler as kind of the Bishop of Wings, gets bigger over time. And then you get to redistribute the counters, which is nice. So just another big beater. Life Creed Duo as another way for like ETB life gain. This Star Scrape Cleric, this one, whenever you gain life, each opponent loses a life. So a nice way to kind of combo with that. You have the Lunar Convocation. Wow, I can't speak today. Beginning your end step, if you gain life this turn, each opponent loses a life. So just kind of replicating this effect. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you gained and lost life this turn, you get to get a 1/1 bat. You pay 2 mana to draw a card, which is a nice mana sink for the deck. You can use things like my opponent was doing, either the Thran Portal or the Caves of Koilos. Like paying the life, even if you don't have to trigger this effect. Just be mindful with Auto Tapper, you're going to want to manually do that. You have a new bat in Zorlin, Cosmos Caller. 3 mana, 3/3 Flying Vigilance. Whenever a bat you control attacks, you gain a life. And then whenever Zorlin enters the battlefield or attacks, you may pay Orzhov and 2 life. When you do, return target non-land permanent with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield finale counter. So nice little kind of mana sink. Gumdrop Poisoner could be removal in this deck and give you some life. Virtue Persistence, another way to gain life and be some removal. And then Big Bat God on the top end. This deck seems pretty well positioned against mono red, just lots of incidental ways to gain life. I say that they've only played mono red twice, 1-1, but there's definitely kind of some way to deal some damage and then just gain some life with this deck. So it's an interesting kind of shell. Some of the numbers you could probably refine over time. There's a lot of like random 2-ofs that might make sense to be either more of, less of, stuff like that. Like I would probably be on more Essence Chandlers. I do like the Lunar Convocations. So there's kind of some numbers to give you an idea of where to start with the life gain deck. We have Mono Green Stompy. So we have 15-3 with this list here. And we have Evolving Adaptive. So basically 1 mana 1/1 gets bigger whenever you cast a creature that's bigger than it. So kind of the Pelt Collector style effect. Evolving Ooze. You have hard-hitting questions as a fight spell that deals damage, not necessarily fight, so it's good against stuff with Death Touch. Paw Patch Recruit, a new card. So a 1 mana 2/1, so good stats on its own, has Trample. And you can also offspring it. So think of it as like kicker, 1 mana. So you can pay 3 mana total. You get a copy of it that's a 1/1. So you basically for 3 mana get a 2/1 and a 1/1 that have trample. And then the ability, whenever a creature you control becomes a target of a spell or ability opponent controls, you put a 1/1 on target creature other than that creature. So if they kill, say you're evolving adaptive, you get to put a counter on something else. And then they trigger each other, so you can actually put counters on each other, which is kind of cool. Flourishing Bloomkin, just a scalable threat, gets bigger. Keen Eye Recruit, kind of like a Scavenging Ooze effect, 2 mana, 3/3, and then you can exile cards for mana. If there's 4 different card types exiled, it becomes a 7/7 Trampler. Sharp-Eyed Rookie, another card that gets bigger as you cast bigger things in the deck. This was one where I didn't include it in my mono green list just because a lot of your cards may be smaller than it, just coming in naturally, but this one, even if it just becomes like a 3/3 Vigilance, could be reasonable. I provide some card advantage. Hunter's Talent as another fight effect. This one, I had it in pre-release. This card's very strong. Another nice mana sink, as well as providing some trample. So there is that, as well as Innkeeper's Talent as a way. I actually had both of these in my pool, which was nice. At the beginning of your combat, you put a counter on something, and then permanents you control counters have ward, and then you can double the amount of counters. Another new card is Sharpshooter. So this is kind of a blow-up artifact enchantment card. So it's a 4/4 reach for 3. And then if you give them a gift of a card, so they get to draw a card, but you can blow up artifact enchantment. At its base, it's a 4/4 reach. Bloated Contaminator, just an evasive creature that can proliferate. There's a lot of counter themes. Ocaster Trailblazer draws you cards as you cast other big things. So this deck's also on 3 Sharpshooters. So there's a sideboard here. You don't need to focus on the sideboard for this, so just keep that in mind. 22 force in this deck. So we have that there. We have a Mouse deck, 10-7, so not like the best record in the world, but give you an idea of what folks are trying out. So with the Mouse deck, we have Cheeky House Mouse, we have the Fleetfoot Sword Master, 1 mana, 1/2, with that offspring ability I mentioned, so you can make another copy. Valiant is, so it's like the heroic effect that targets your own creature. Whenever this creature becomes a target of spell or ability you control for the first time, mice you control get +1/0 till end of turn. So it's like an Anthem effect. So like the main difference, Valiant triggers off spells or abilities. Heroic is unlimited amount of targets, but it's only spells, not abilities. Heartfire Hero, which we had in the mono red deck. Might of the Meek, as we had in my red deck. So just a lot of targeted effects here. The Emberheart Challengers, Lightning Helix's Burn. We have Manifold Mouse here, another offspring effect. So at the beginning of your combat on your turn, Mouse gains your choice of Double Strike or Trample, so you can kind of build your own Embercleave. Ossification is removal. Seed Glaive Mentor, 3 mana, 3/2 Vigilance Haste. And then whenever it becomes targeted, you put a 1/1 counter on it. And then Mabel, very strong guard, I think. Just needs to... Well, it's kind of contingent on how good mice are. So it's an Anthem effect. And then when it enters the battlefield, you just get a really strong equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/1, Vigilance, Trample, and Haste, and equip 2. Some ossifications as removal. So looking at the curve here. Excuse me. I would probably... Like this version here, because playing ossification is on a higher number of basics, but you could probably reconfigure the mana base, not play ossification, just play shock or something like that, and then up the number of battlefield forages for cleaner mana, up the number of Cavern of Souls as well. You'll see the Rock-based Village as a new card here. Then there is this domain deck, 22 and 11 by Barbarian 100. So this deck here, kind of a Niv to Light, Niv Supreme deck. So with this here, this one's going to be hard to kind of show. But basically, Analyze the Pollen helps you hit your lion drops. You do tutor late game. Ancient Cornucopia as a way to gain some life. You have temporary lockdowns in here as a way to kind of sweep up the aggressive decks. Doppelgangs, just a whole bunch of removal. Lightning Helixes. Soul Search here is like a Thoughtseize style effect that can be used. Beanstalk draws you cards. Kazul's Flankers, Graveyard Hate, Ill-Time Explosion as a sweeper as well. Make your own luck to kind of free cast. Niv Supreme lets you jumpstart instants and sorceries from your graveyard, and it's also hexproof from monocolored. So that mono red burn deck can't kill this through burn damage. Some Sunfalls, Leyline Bindings, Herd Migrations, Atraxas kind of in here as well. You'll notice that without the Triomes, they're using like the Lush Protocol, Hedge Maze, the Surveil lands. I do think it's a little ambitious to have Demolition Field in your 5-color deck along with the Fountain Port, but it's working to some extent. There's a lot of tap lands in this deck, so you do have to rely on some of these earlier kind of sweeper style effects. You'll also notice in this version there's Invasion of Arcavius, which lets you sideboard in terms of various effects. So this one does care about the sideboard. Then we go to Cookies. So this was a deck that existed before. This one's 9-1. This one's from Xinzhao. Might be pronouncing that wrong, but the original list came from Ash Lizzle. Nothing really new with this one. I'll just kind of feature it to show folks if they already have the deck. It's reasonable in that case. They're just adding in this Fountain Port land, which is kind of like a new utility land. Lets you draw cards by sacrificing a token. You could create tokens and you could create treasures as well. Just a lot of useful things for this deck that cares about artifacts and makes a lot of tokens and stuff like that. But aggressively slanted Simic deck that can gain some life, make some big beaters to kind of come in that respect. And then lastly, we have a Golgari. So this one's 8-2 by Ruby the Ripper. This one here, not really any new cards. So if you have an existing Golgari deck, this is another case of playing kind of the cards you have. The only addition is Fabled Passage, which was, if you've been playing for a while from the previous set, you might already have these. Just mid-range threats, Free Stride Lookout can get you some lands into play, help you ramp up like that. Some Nisses on the top end. Gix Command is a sweeper. Just a lot of interaction. I think like in best of one, I probably would just play the other Go for the Throat or Cut Down or the Bitter Triumph. 3 Lilianas in best of one might be also a little much. I would probably just, the format tends to lean a little bit more aggressive as opposed to controlling. That's something to kind of consider there. But this is just another deck. If you have the cards, it could be something you can build for the time. So that is it. If you have any cool decks you want to share with the community, drop a arena export. If you do a link, it sometimes gets blocked, but as soon as the stats are out, we'll come out with the stats itself, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.